This is Voices of Customer Experience, a podcast where we bring you the very best thought leaders and practitioners of customer experience and its overlapping verticals, such as marketing, analytics, behavior economics, journey mapping, and design. Our goal is to help you be better at your job by listening to the experiences and leadership of others who, like you, have dedicated their careers to improving the dialogue between companies and customers. Voices of Customer Experience podcast is brought to you by Worthix, the first and only self-adaptive survey for measuring customer experience. Discover your worth at worthix.com. Saeed Baghiil is the unconventional branding and marketing advisor whose out-of-the-box ideas ignite companies to rethink how to reach their target audience and build sustainable brands. His clientele consists of CEOs and CMOs of leading organizations who are bold enough to be strikingly different from their competitors by breaking the chains of traditional patterns, evolving their business, and as a result, creating brands that dominate the category. According to him, well-built brands are timeless, which is why companies trust him for his in-depth knowledge of the science of brands and his ability to create marketing strategies that attain continuous growth. Welcome to one more episode of Voices of Customer Experience Season 3. Joining me, as usual, is James Conrad. Hi, James.
Hi, Mary. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on. And our guest today is Saeed Baghiil. Saeed, how are you today?
Hi, Mary. Hi, James.
Great to have you on. I wanted to start off with you kind of introducing yourself, what you do, what your passion is, and how you feel in your way you're changing the world.
My name is Saeed Baghiil. I'm originally from the Middle East. I grew up in the US. My formative years were in Europe and in part in Egypt. And I wasn't an intelligent student, by the way. So I did my high school in North Dakota and finished my university in Maine. And I've been honest about my GPA since I had the confidence to go on stage and talk about it. So
There you go.
I graduated in marketing with a 2.0 GPA, and I'm still in marketing, So I guess things worked after college, not in college. And when people ask me, how did you get a 2.0 GPA? I said, probably my professors were boring. So I graduated from the University of Maine, and I've worked with Edison Brothers Incorporated. They're in the apparel business back then, before the economic meltdown that happened in 2008. I've worked with them for about 12 years in the retail sector. Then I left and moved to Mexico and moved to Egypt and Saudi Arabia for a bit as a consultant. And I was a frequent traveler between Saudi Arabia and Hong Kong and South Africa for work. And that was when my consultancy started. I published my first book around 2008 and then followed several books and co-authored one. And I was asked to praise Dan Hill's book, Emotionomics. And that's when I received my true confidence on going international with my thought. I've regularly published on marketing that exists in Dubai called the GMR, Gulf Marketing Review. And definitely from there, my experience started polishing and gained more confidence. And going on stage was not easy for me in the beginning. I mean, it was sharing a stage with those that sort of have a global name. And that definitely was a plus, where my visions grew more ambitious. And I thought, like, you know what? I have something. If I'm invited to go on stage here and I'm invited to praise someone's book that is well known, so I must have something. And from 2011 till today, I've been traveling across Europe, US, and part of Asia on consultancy mission, public speaking, and facilitating. So it's been dynamic, it's been exciting, and brand has always been in the heart of everything. And I'm sort of the person that always evolves himself. I need to set the example on myself as a personal brand. Instead of preaching on personal brand, we're talking about organizational brand, and I don't even set my own.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of contradicts, So you have a lot of people that talk about personal brand, but they're not one. There's a lot of people that talk about organizational brand, but they've never worked on their own. So I focus very much on building my own personal brand and my company brand and moving forward. Brand has always been in the center of my work. It's always been where I do a lot of research, a lot of insight. And I battle the line of thought that exists versus how things are evolving. I mean, you look at the audience, they're evolving, and everything around us is evolving. How come the subject is not evolving? So that's pretty much what my life is.
And where did this passion for branding come from? I mean, In my mind, branding is the beginning of everything. It's that
Yeah.
first contact that you have with a customer, that's a customer seeing you for the first time. It's the moment that you can do that love at first sight bit, let's say, from a certain point of view. But what was it for you that started this career with branding?
Well, I graduated in marketing. I've worked in marketing since graduation with Edison Brothers. And when I left, I didn't want to pursue another career as an employee. I wanted to create something. I've always loved the idea of creation. And I think that is where I'm sort of the person who does not process existing values, but I like creating values in how I want to improve myself and the society around me. So it's always about solving a problem, and marketing plays an important role in solving a problem by identifying what is the problem and how to address the solution. And from there, when the industry started evolving, then brand came in. When I went to college, we didn't have a class in brand. It was retail marketing, market research, inside marketing, consumer behavior, and all those, and not even a subject on brand. And I graduated in 1990.
Wow.
So even now, when you talk about brand, I've always said that everyone can claim it's a brand, but it's only a brand in the mind of the audience, not in the boardroom or the management, how they claim it. That passion started because I wanted to educate the public on what I know. I improved in what I know by reading, by practicing, by being around those that are advocating brand. One of the people that truly inspired me in the beginning of my career was Al Rees. I read his book, Positioning, many of his books I've read, and it inspired me. Maybe Al was more of simplicity in defining what marketing is and didn't touch much on brand, but he did come up at the end of it with the two immutable laws of branding, for example. And I have Al on LinkedIn, and I've shared some thoughts with him on brand and branding. So he agrees in a lot, and he disagrees, but I love it. I love the point that somebody disagrees. So that's where the passion comes because I like to read. I like to understand what brand is, and honestly, I don't know how to describe how this passion was born. I just feel it. I don't know when it started. I've always loved marketing, and I've always been a marketeer. But then I've evolved to fit the market on brand. And then I've continued on brand. And I believe sometimes that I'm a bit ahead of time when I share line of thoughts with other experts. But I am enjoying the battle almost every day.
Awesome.
Yeah. I've spent most of my life in brand as well, and I probably have a similar story. I can't remember exactly what drove me down this road, but once you get hooked, it's hard to get off. I wanted you, Baghiil, to talk a little bit about brand relevance. You talk a lot about brand relevance on your site. And for our listeners, could you talk a little bit about why you talk about brand relevance, what it means to you, and the impact that brands can have on consumers' lives?
Generally, people are talking about brand equity. And generally, when you talk about equity, so when you think about a category, for example, in FMCG or in service, retail service, which customer experience plays an important role.
Mhm.
So within the category, generally there's two top leaders, and then the rest of them are replicating the values that exist for the two leaders. And everyone, as head of marketing, battles the argument with James. You've worked with reputable agencies, and you've heard the word equity quite often.
No, of course.
So everybody battles the point and says, "Oh, we're building our equity." But the question is, how are you building on an equity when you're fourth in the category, fifth in the category, and you're constantly competing with the leader of the category? You're not building an equity. Actually, you're validating somebody else's equity, which is the category leader. Now, the category leader itself owns the value, and it's because he's relevant. He's the most relevant to address what is that unique set of value and what's the point of reference as a brand. The definition of what brand is also confuses people because at times people are addressing advertising as branding. They see a billboard with a logo, so that's basically branding, which is almost true because advertising contributes part of the touch points on brand. Advertising in simple terms is awareness. But branding is continuous. It's everyday relationship. That's what makes it. I mean, when we talk about brand, it's a sum of value that comes out of an experience that refers to a name, which is an idea. That is what a brand is, and it holds a file in the minds of the stakeholders. Now, that file itself to be active. Advertising does not create the action. Advertising just raises the thought. But what creates the action is branding, because branding is all about relationship. It's constant across all the touch points. So people are confused about branding and advertising. And then even the agencies, when they call we're branding agencies, and they're selling, as an example, a branding agency comes and gives you a strategy and a guideline. The CEOs or the CMO is quite confused what to do next. So what he does, the most immediate point of reference for him to activate that strategy or guideline is advertising. The whole experience to a lot of these companies is very confusing. And we've seen what big companies have done. I mean, look at Apple and Samsung, for example. I mean, no matter what Samsung does, he's a point of reference. He's a point of reference to a big brand called Apple. Apple does not spend as much as Samsung because Apple does brand name. What Samsung does is called advertising.
Because the market talks a lot about branding as the positioning, right, of setting expectations for what it's like to be a customer of, and what the offer is, and how we're positioned, and there's billions and maybe hundreds of billions of dollars spent to do that. And that's how advertising kind of comes in often, is to help build and reinforce those perceptions. But it sounds like you're saying that you see branding as more holistic, that it's not about just communicating out a message or positioning a brand in a certain way. It's about how someone experiences a company, a hotel, an airline, a product, that really is maybe more important, that you're arguing, than our communication of that proposition. Would that be true?
Absolutely. I mean, branding is holistic. If a message goes out from the corporate office, from the corporate communication, that message actually touches every point. It touches every essence of the stakeholders, whether if it's something that's done to the investors, whether it's something that's done to the employees, because that employee himself is engaging with customers almost every day. So branding cannot just play a single role. It plays holistically. Now, advertising could play a role from the customer side, but not necessarily from the employee side. But here's another thing also, which is very important. If you don't do brand building inside, how do you build brand outside? Like you just said, James, you said meeting the expectation.
Right.
I mean, if I make a promise tomorrow to meet the expectation, one of the main ambassadors to deliver that expectation, to deliver that promise, is the employee himself. Because I've already built the expectation from communication, delivering that communication, talking about the values themselves. I've built in the mind of the audience, the customer himself, what is the promise. So I raise the bar on the expectation. Now, who's going to deliver that expectation? The product itself off the shelf? Absolutely not. It's the employee. And we keep on forgetting the value of the employee and how important is this employee as an ambassador. And we're asking that our customers should become ambassadors. How do you expect your customers to become an ambassador if your employee is not an ambassador?
The thing that's really catching my ear here is that, James and I have been doing this podcast for a while, and one thing that we share, James, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're constantly trying to show our listeners how much branding overlaps customer experience, which is kind of the main focus of this podcast. And you're really validating that right now for me, because the overlap that you're talking about is even more so than I initially envisioned. So when we talk about customer experience from a personal perspective, we're talking about everything that the customer lives when in contact with that brand, from before the relationship begins until even after. And from what you're saying, branding is exactly the same thing, which would mean that both branding and customer experience play across the same timeline in a customer's lives. They walk even more hand in hand than I even thought. Honestly, I feel like this is a message that we need to get out, maybe even louder and clearer, so that more people and more organizations start understanding how important it is to work together, whether it's branding or customer experience.
Mary, absolutely. I just wanted to add to your thought here. When you look at Macy's, for example, or you look at Walmart, or you look at any of the traditional retail stores, where does the journey end on the customer experience? Is it the point that when you go to the cash register, pays the amount, gets the bag, and that's it? No, actually, no. In the heart of the customer, the journey continues.
Yeah.
And when we talked about e-commerce the other day, when you and I discussed a few of it, look at the e-commerce itself. The journey itself actually stays about 21 days to 30 days, because you're talking about warranty, you're talking about building up the trust. At the same time, there's a point of return, cash return, refund. There's a lot of working blocks in the whole entire experience as a journey that takes the journey up to 21 days, probably to a month. But what happens when I just click pay and that journey is finished there? No, actually not, because I lost the customer right there. I lost his trust, because anything that goes wrong after he paid, anything goes wrong, I've just determined the end of my brand. So that's why I'm saying that customer experience, when people talk about CX and when they talk about design thinking, they always forget the value the brand brings into this journey. They always forget that branding actually contributes in building up that relationship.
Imagine being able to pinpoint precisely why your customer chose you over your competition or didn't. How much easier would it be to create growth strategies, secure budget funding, and improve customer experiences? This is what Worthix can deliver through its auto-adaptive AI survey. So stop focusing on what and when and start understanding why your customers buy at worthix.com. I mean, there are very few business models, if any, that are singular one-time transactions. At some point, you should have a rebuy. I'm here trying to think of what kind of situation would be a one-time purchase. A gas station on the side of the road on a destination that you're going to? Not necessarily, because nothing's stopping you from driving back there in the future. So I can't really think of any model that should, or it's acceptable for this model to ignore what comes after the purchase.
Yeah.
Yes, very true.
If you look at how organizations focus resources, let's just focus on resources and I mean money and people, the marketing side and brand building side, Baghiil, gets way more attention and dollars and investment to build. I think about the advertising budget versus the employee training budgets, So it gets a lot more attention and there's a lot more focus and fame in what at least traditionally has been called brand building, which tends to go hand in hand with advertising, communications, marketing. And oftentimes the experience side either is siloed away from and sometimes doesn't even fit within marketing. The CMO doesn't always manage, customer experience. And they end up being disconnected. It's been something Mary and I have talked about, Baghiil, on previous episodes about this disconnect between the amount of money spent in what I call the front end, right, of brand building versus the back end of brand building. And from what you're saying, it sounds like rather than thinking of brand equity as more how big is our positioning, how well defined is our positioning, it sounds more like it's more about how synced up is your sort of front end brand building with everything that happens from the experiential side. And if you get those in sync and the expectations and what we deliver are seamless, then it feels like that's really the way that you're suggesting that brand strength should be measured.
Very true, very true. If we talk about e-commerce in the online ecosystem, for example, think about back in the 60s and 50s when brand didn't make a difference. It was all about commoditized. It was about needs and it was about necessities, things that you need, you buy,
right?
Whether if it's the sugar, salt, soap, or whatever it is, but you have a label there. Now, that generally has been transformed to what online is. Today, online is just about, it's about price reference. If you have the right price, you and the customer. So we're in the era where online is commoditized right now at this stage. And I believe, honestly, we're in the generalist market when it comes to online, and specialty is going to come in the near future because it's been so cluttered right now that any small size that opens online doesn't last about a year and a half, is out of business. It's because there's a replication of the existing values. Example, if you look at the Amazon model has been replicated in even in the Middle East, has been replicated by all these names that are coming out these days. So if you're replicating as Amazon models, where's the point of differentiation here? What are the values you're bringing? How are you building you cannot build a brand because every time you replicate Amazon's value, you're validating Amazon's presence. You're building Amazon's relevance. You're building Amazon's equity. So as long as we're doing that, we're in the stage of commodity. But when does this commodity change? When business owners start thinking and saying, listen, we cannot just replicate what Amazon does. It's already been replicated by number 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. It's time for us to decide what we're going to tap on and how we're going to be focused. There's a problem of focus right there also. Everybody wants to be the jack of all trades when it comes to online. What is the point of focus? What are we going to specialize in? Once that specialty hits in, that's when brand building is going to come on online. But right now, I think it's commoditized. Everybody is replicating the same values, and it's either brand or price. And I'll tell you, it's probably 80% price when you go online and 20% brand.
So, Baghiil, do you see then in the e-commerce space, as you talk about, I love this concept of sort of replicating what Amazon's doing, and it's becoming commoditized. But where do companies and how can companies then differentiate in a similar business model? It sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, are you suggesting then that experience and how people experience brands is a way of differentiating the value proposition beyond just the business model and then technology?
Yes, absolutely. But let's agree fundamentally, where people intend to parachute a lot into brand thinking without understanding the fundamental. So if we're going to talk about brand, we're going to talk about the business strategy itself, because brand is born out of the business strategy.
Yep.
So if we're going to change the business strategy of Amazon online, that's definitely is going to be a specialist, because Amazon is almost in his business strategy is tapping almost in every industry, and the focus point of his differentiation is customer centric. That's how he has positioned himself. And absolutely, the work he's been doing for the past 20 years, it's addressing the customer's benefit more than anyone. And I don't think there will be another organization that's going to beat Amazon on his strength. And if I go and battle Amazon on his strength, I'll be out of business. And we've seen the battle between Walmart and Amazon. It's been ongoing for a very long time. Now, what I'm saying is this: go back and draw a business strategy that makes you more relevant. Then think about the brand itself, because Amazon has a business strategy. He's customer centric to the heart, and that's why his brand became point of reference. Now, but you cannot just go talk about brand online to build a brand and talk about value proposition and point of differentiation when your business strategy itself is still the Amazon business strategy. So I'm saying start from the fundamental itself, start from the business strategy. That's where your point of differentiation is. Before you even dissect the brand, go back to the core and understand what are the emotional values you're going to bring to the table, what are the functional values, and what's going to be the real core point that's going to create that point of differentiation.
Let me change the subject really quick. You talk a lot about digital transformation and how digital transformation is a cornerstone in branding. Can you expand on this a little bit?
Sure. Mary, that's a great question. And I'm not a tech savvy guy, but I see a lot of LinkedIn. Everybody talking about digital transformation. It sometimes scares me. Absolutely, it scares me. It scares me how people talk about digital transformation with an organization that does not even have a culture. Isn't it at the end of the day, we're dealing with people? Even if we do the digital transformation, don't we have to maintain a certain type of culture? Again, culture comes before brand. So if we're going to go to digital transformation, and go to brand building, and we never even touched the culture, everything what we're doing will collapse. So why not go back fundamentally? As much as I like to see digital transformation, as much as I'm very much concerned that it is sort of a bubble, few experts understand what a digital transformation is, and many just follow those trends and try to apply. But in today's world, I think digital transformation is right in the heart of it. And I don't think any organization in the next 10 years will survive without going through that transformation. But I'm saying one thing very important. As much as the digital transformation is in the heart of it, culture is in the heart of it. Because at the end of the day, if even if you're reducing the number of employees, it will be still people that you're dealing with. That culture has to be in there, or you cannot even build brand. We intend to think about the technical side, the functionalities, and so on, and without understanding the actual science that's going to build all this and deliver the final vision based on the strategic missions. And that's the problem with ourselves as humans. We intend to parachute into ideas first and skip all the values.
So you right now, most of your work is focused in the Middle East, right? Middle East and Europe.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've heard you say before, and it's on your website, is that the Middle East, in many terms, when it comes to marketing and branding, they're still a couple decades behind what we consider to be like the cutting edge of marketing here in the US. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that most of the work that you're doing at the moment is sort of bridging that gap between the West and the Middle East? Or, what sort of ideas are you exporting to the Middle East and which are you importing? Because, I mean, it's a massive market and it's a market that's very in tune with customer experience, with branding, with marketing. They're betting a lot of chips on building customer centric companies. So, what are some of the main points that you feel are valid to bring up and mention about where the Middle East is going with their marketing and branding strategies?
Mary, that's a great question. And actually, this is one of my passions. It's my purpose to enable tomorrow's leaders in the Middle East, the bright minds, the startups of today who are actually thinking about brand, who understand how culture works. I actually quit on the older crowd, the current small percentage of the CEOs, with a mindset that refuses to change and a mindset that's so adamant of what they believe in. Now, let's go a bit back in history. the way the market was formed in the Middle East was an influence from multinationals. So you have P&G, you have Unilever, you have Kraft, and all those organizations. They had a strategic interest in the Middle East, but not to fundamentally build a market, but it was more of a financial interest. So when you have P&G, for example, their head office is for global is in London or in Brussels, for example. So they intend to look at that market before even establishing the market from a trade perspective. So you'll have a distributor, he will import, distribute, and basically at the end of the day, the whole entire cycle is about sales. Now, once the nature of the market itself improves, the government gets involved and builds up the necessary logistics and so on. These multinationals start investing into marketing, branding, because they believe there's going to be a sort of an awareness with the consumer. It's no longer that Pampers, they pick it up, the diaper they pick up is called Pampers, but also Pamper needs to battle somebody else who's going to come into the market. So when they go and hire, they look at engineers because they want people that just follow the rules. The rules are set in America. The rules are set in Europe. So when he looks at a brand manager or a head of marketing, he doesn't want somebody who graduated from in marketing. He doesn't want somebody who studied brand. He wants somebody that will follow the rule. And the best one to follow the rule is an engineer. So literally the whole entire market right now, we look at the marketeers in the Middle East, generally about 85 to 90% of them are engineers, engineer background. So they have that trading mindset where they say, okay, here's the number of SKUs I have. I need to manage this. And the only way he can understand of managing the brand is his relationship with the agencies. But he does not understand the fundamental of brands. So what was the result of this? Let me go fast track on this. Then all of a sudden, the local companies started developing themselves. They understood now from the multinational that there's something called brand. It could be a nice logo. It could be a nice design. So these engineers, when they quit the multinational, whether P&G, Unilever, they go to the local side of the business, which is the local brands. Once they go there, they get confused. Why? Because it requires complete fundamental structure, unlike P&G, unlike Unilever. So here's when they get stuck. So I started witnessing the problem right there when I saw several exercises, and I've published several articles on these exercises from local brands. And I said, oh my God, this is not brand. Well, the head of marketing claimed there was a brand exercise, a branding exercise, but it's not. So what happened? Key examples, for example, somebody that owns a tea company, decided that he will reposition his company because he's selling CTCs, long leaf, and the ones that are enjoying that sort of experience are the older age and they're declining. So he wants to target the younger ones. So the head of marketing was a former P&G'er, great guy, comes in. I'm sure also there's a lot of politics within the organization. He's not able to do much of what he wanted to do. But what did he do? He repositioned the values based on what Lipton's leadership is, teabag. So how am I going to place something that is loose leaf that people enjoyed through an experience into teabag, which the word teabag itself is Lipton in general within the Middle East. People, if you go blindly and ask anyone in the Middle East and Africa or even Asia, teabag, that's automatically Lipton. So they validated the strength of Lipton. So that itself as an example was horrible. I mean, you cannot blame him or you cannot blame the market, but you also blame the organization. So when you see that kind of exercise is when you know that you have a great responsibility of educating and enabling the brand understanding and the differentiation between brand and branding. And unfortunately, to even make things worse, that you have an advertising agencies that talks about brand and goes and approaches companies and they tell them, okay, you know what? We'll do the brand strategy for you. Well, you're in advertising. How are you? So this whole entire mix-up that has caused the market to completely collapse on the thought itself drove me to think and say, okay, I have to do something. I'm not big, I'm a small timer. But again, what did I do? I started educating people on branding and marketing on all the social media platforms, whether LinkedIn, started writing books and so on. But recently, what I did, and I found this to be a lot better for me, is I wanted to expand. And in order to expand, is I started partnering with different organizations and different principles in which we see the same vision and the same purpose. And that's how we created, for example, the Brand Summit conference that took place last year in Cairo. This year is going to happen in Bahrain this coming September, and again in Cairo. And we want to expand it across Middle East and Africa. And I've partnered with Brand Week in Istanbul, also in Turkey, in which I'll have my own panel every year. That's another initiative. And then I've partnered with great thinkers out of America, out of Europe, and we created something called the Core. which we will publish articles and go on stage and speak about certain types of thought on the fundamental of brand and how you can build brand without the use of advertising. So it's exciting. It's exciting. It's been challenging, certainly. But I'm very extremely hopeful that things will change, that the new generations will definitely understand brand a lot better. And the dynamic of leadership that exists today in the Middle East would bring that certain change that's been needed. I mean, you've got young leaders today in power who ultimately believe that time has come where Middle East needs to be very competitive, globally competitive. And I think there's a great hope, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my experience in the Middle East has been that it's a fascinating market and there's tons of opportunity. And I've seen things going on there in the marketing side that I think are best practice, even globally, that I've, in my interactions there, have sort of brought back to New York and other places as things that we should be adopting. So lots of opportunity there. And I'm glad you're part of the movement to continue to improve. The last thing I wanted to ask as we wind down here, Baghiil, is as we think about our listeners today, you've been doing this for a long time and pushing this idea of branding and more holistic ways, as we've talked about today. What would you say to our listeners as they're sort of starting now to reflect on their own branding for their organizations and how they're doing it? What would be some of your best advice on either the questions they should be asking themselves, advice you might give a company that's starting on this journey of expanding the way they think about branding more holistically? What would be some of your best advice that you'd give our listeners and sort of where to start on this journey?
James, brand has been always a marketing arm. Well, in general, brand is not a marketing arm. Brand is supposed to be in the hands of the CEO because it actually reflects on every stakeholder. Now, my advice would be this. My first advice from my experience that I've noticed in the past 20 years, if you're the founder of a company or if you're the CEO of a company and you don't understand how brands work, it's critical. It's going to cause the organization to face a lot of problems in the long run. Because if you're going to build up a vision and you're going to build up a strategy, your business strategy, and you're going to build up a culture, brand has to be in the center of it. So if the CEO does not champion the brand or the founder does not champion the brand, how does he expect that his organization builds a perception across all stakeholders? It's almost impossible.
It's a great point.
Yeah, if he leaves that to marketing, it will always be from the demand side of the business. But how about the supply side of the business? Who's going to lead that? And who's going to build the brand with the employees? The CEO sets the example for his employees, not marketing. So I always say, learn what brand is. Understand the fundamental of brand. Read if you have to read. Take a coaching if you have to. But the CEO and a founder has to lead brand and not marketing. And unfortunately today, James, you know well, and Mary, that brand has been left to marketing. So it only serves one sector or one stakeholder from 50 or 80 different stakeholders. So it's this is the sort of advice I would certainly give at this stage.
Great point. Great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Baghiil, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great having you.
It's a pleasure, Mary.
Learned so much. Is there some way that our listeners, if they want to stay in touch with you, if they want to read more of your material, how can they find you? What's the best way to find you?
I'm always on LinkedIn. I always say I'm going to quit LinkedIn, but I'm having a hard time quitting LinkedIn. So I publish almost every morning. I'm on LinkedIn, and if they search in the box there Baghiil, they'll find me. And happy to serve every day. As long as people understand the value of brand and it's going to improve their organization, I'm happy to serve. It's what we give, and that's our purpose. My purpose as an organization or as an individual is to help those that need. And I know it's in the long term, if people listen and understand the value of brand, it'll be very extremely rewarding to them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. James, thank you again for being here and sharing a bit of your experience. And we'll see you all again next time. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Mary. Have a good one.
Thanks, Baghiil.
Thank you for joining us on one more episode of Voices of Customer Experience. This podcast is hosted and produced by Mary Drumond, edited and co-produced by Nick Gomez and Steve Barry. This podcast was brought to you by Worthix. Discover your worth at worthix.com.